Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
At Politics Live, we bring people together around this desk to argue and sometimes even to agree, certainly debate on the issues making the headlines. Sometimes our guests are from Westminster think tanks, like Mark here today, and these think tanks aren't uncontroversial. So we thought it was about time we looked a little more closely at what think tanks do and who they're working for. Here's Elizabeth Glinker.
Get behind the country and help make this a great success.
Think tanks.
NHS seems to be in a perpetual state.
Some of the most influential groups you've never heard of.
The concerns that the public may have.
They meet MPs, appear on TV, write reports and influence policy. But who are they and who's paying?
You can keep asking me and I'm just not going to tell you. It's a private matter.
If there really is nothing to worry about, then why can't people share this information?
Well, if it makes them suspicious, then, you know, that's not something I can control.
We're going behind the scenes with two of the most influential think tanks who've been accused of secrecy and underhand tactics to ask, do they have something to hide?
A think tank is a group of experts who provide research and advice on a range of political, social and economic problems.
On any journey through Westminster, you'll pass the doors of dozens of them, hidden in plain sight.
They can be left-wing, right-wing or neutral. But what's worrying some people is where the money's coming from and what it's buying.
The principal concern here is that decisions that are meant to be made in the public interest are captured by narrow private interests.
Duncan Hames works for a think tank dedicated to scrutinising the behaviour of other think tanks. He says businesses may be trying to influence politicians without us knowing.
If a sugar manufacturer were to publish a report advocating that there shouldn't be a sugar tax, then people will know that that report's come from a sugar manufacturer and they can form their own view as to whether to pay much attention to it.
But what if that opinion comes from a think tank? Here's Dia Chakravarti, then of the Taxpayers Alliance, criticising the sugar tax back in 2017.
A great win for the nanny state champions. For the rest of us, not so much.
If instead a think tank publishes a report but doesn't declare who funds them, how are we as members of the public meant to have confidence in the objectivity and the independence of that work?
This matters because these groups are influential, with politicians regularly appearing at their events. And while ministers have to declare a meeting with a business, a dinner with a think tank is off the books. It's difficult to measure just how influential they are, but think tanks will often boast about their connections. Here's the head of the think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, doing just that, whilst being secretly filmed by Greenpeace campaigners last year.
Because he's such an expert, he's able to get into ministers and cabinet ministers like that.
And so he'll be able to make those introductions.
Oh yeah, he knows them all really well.
So what about the funding? Think tanks are judged by 3 criteria. Do they disclose their total income? Do they name their funders? Do they declare the size of donations? So, for example, the Institute for Government does all of these. Policy Network does the first 2, but doesn't declare the size of donations. The Institute of Economic Affairs discloses only its total income. The Adam Smith Institute and the Taxpayers Alliance provide no information whatsoever.
This is Tufton Street, home to no less than 8 right-of-centre think tanks, including perhaps the most well-known, the Taxpayers Alliance.
Launched in 2003, the Taxpayers Alliance is a private company and doesn't have to declare its donors.
We respect the privacy of every single person that donates to the TPA, and many of our donations are way below £5,000
Some of them
per
might be,
year.
but some of them are a lot more than that, aren't they? So why not be more open about who's funding you?
If somebody who donated £5,000 or more to the TPA chose to come onto your programme and say, I support the Taxpayers Alliance with my own money, I wouldn't stop them. In fact, I'd support them. But I'm not going to elicit that information.
But you know that makes people suspicious, don't you?
Well, if it makes them suspicious, then, you know, that's not something I can control. I think what happens is you often see a confusion between, you know, people who disagree with what we say and don't try and tackle that, and instead they try and discredit us by talking about other issues.
And one of those accusations is that the Taxpayers Alliance has been coordinating with other right-wing groups to achieve their goals. While some had previously denied it, last year a whistleblower case revealed the TPA was one of 9 think tanks who were holding regular strategy meetings, something I put to John O'Connell.
So the Taxpayers Alliance hosts a monthly meeting of, I suppose, what you call broadly the centre-right coterie of think tanks and campaign groups. It's very, very hard to come up with a coordinated strategy with such a diverse bunch. I've not actually been at that meeting for over a year now.
Really?
So,
why is that?
Because I've had other things on, or whatever else it is, meetings.
Well, just around the corner from Tufton Street is another think tank, the Institute for Economic Affairs, or the IEA. I'm heading in there now to speak to the boss.
So down here into
That boss is Mark Littlewood, who we saw earlier in the secret filming.
Right.
He was happy to show me around, but not to talk about his funders.
You can keep asking me, and I'm just not going to tell you. It's a private matter. And just the fact that there are loads of people screaming on Twitter asking me a question is not a reason why you should answer it. Supposing I were to say, these are the 12 FTSE 100 companies that give us money. You actually think these conspiracy theorists should go away?
Maybe they wouldn't go away, but you'd be being honest, wouldn't you?
But I say it's not a question of honesty, it's a question of privacy.
They're not interested in Mr. and Mrs. Smith from Stoke-on-Trent who might make a donation, but they might be interested if it's Coca-Cola, if it's big American trusts which have a particular political agenda. They might be interested if it is large oil companies, large
people
pharma
who keep asking these
companies.
questions just don't like our ideas.
In fact, we know the IEA and a number of other UK think tanks have received funding from right-wing American donors because in the US, these groups have to file tax returns.
Do you take money from America?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we'll take money from anywhere in the world as long as it's clean and legal.
But some advocates of free speech say the focus on who's paying is missing the point.
The kind of desperation just now with which we inquire into who funds things is actually quite corrosive in the public sphere. Everybody is now searching around for the hidden strings and the shadowy figures that behind them.
Are there shadowy figures? Should we be worried?
Well, maybe there are shadowy figures, but I think, as I say, I think that's a matter less to worry about. It's only by weighing up different ideas that we actually gain the capacity to work out what it is that we believe ourselves.
What might surprise you is that the Institute of Economic Affairs, like a number of other think tanks, is an educational charity. That comes with tax breaks, but also restrictions on political activity, policed by the Charity Commission.
You have to show that what you're doing is informing people and allowing them to draw their own conclusions. You mustn't be pushing a particular agenda, and of course you can't be party political in any way. If a charity oversteps that line, we can take action.
And just a few days after our interview, the IEA was issued with an official warning for this event, advocating a no-deal Brexit without other opinions represented, which the Charity Commission said risked the perception it was politically biased.
How we regulate think tanks matters because they're here in Westminster every day, lobbying on things that affect our everyday lives. They get to appear on TV, they get quoted in newspapers, and they get to meet politicians behind the scenes. And while some think tanks refuse to say who's funding them, there will be people who are suspicious of their motives. Now, the think tanks we've spoken to say that's missing the point. We should be engaging with their ideas, arguing with them, irrespective of who's paying. But in this digital age of fear and loathing, the calls for transparency are likely to get louder.
I'm asking you to explain to me why organisations who have no transparency behind their financial arrangements are allowed onto the BBC to comment on issues of public policy clearly related to the organisations who are widely believed to be funding them.
Well, Ross, I didn't see this item. I've no idea.
We're not talking about the specific item.
No, I don't want to comment on the general because I haven't seen this particular item.
Well, in that case, can I ask Anne to comment on the general issue?
Yeah, I mean, the editorial guidelines around selection of guests are an area that we can deal with in more detail. I'm afraid I'm not able to comment on this specific. What I would say is that our job in bringing organisations on and putting their views to challenge is an important part of what we do. So I don't agree that we invite organisations onto our news programmes to be interviewed, to be given a platform. They're brought onto our programmes for their views to be challenged and to be interviewed and for what they're advocating to be brought out. Now, if there is a a specific complaint where the context of those views is felt not to be sufficiently clear and being made clear to our audience, and that challenge seems in some way to be inappropriate, then we have channels to enable people to raise complaints about that, and we would consider that properly.
But before it gets to the complaint process, what I'm asking again is, why does the BBC, as a general rule, allow organisations like the IEA, like the Taxpayers Alliance, which is not a membership organisation that represents taxpayers, it's just a company owned by two guys, why are these organisations, who have no transparency behind their financial arrangements, allowed to comment on issues of public policy related clearly to those who are believed widely to be funding them?
Well, our job is to enable a range of views to be put forward and for those views to be challenged through our journalism. As I say, the very specific point that you raise, we can look at that and reply on that point. It's not an issue that's been raised with me before, but my clear understanding of what we seek to do in our journalism is to challenge, not to provide platform.
Mark, do you understand why viewers question us and question you in general as to why we have you on and why we give you a platform for your ideas when we don't know who funds you?
Well, if that applies to the IEA, it's got to apply across the board. When Justin Welby appears on the Andrew Marr sofa to opine about welfare reform, I don't see people saying who funds the Church of England.
We're talking about think tanks.
You can't, I think, cauterise think tanks.
All right, well, let's
and
just
say
talk
the
about...
IEA and the Taxpayers Alliance need to reveal this, but not the Church of England, Shelter, Oxfam, Greenpeace or anybody else.
Well, shall we get you to
engage.
answer for the IEA on these questions? Because these are the questions that viewers have put. And I'm saying to you, do you understand why they want to know
overwhelmingly
who funds you when you are given platforms on programmes like this?
Overwhelmingly, I think the people who ask the questions, overwhelmingly, not exclusively, don't really care about transparency. Because they don't pop up saying who funds you when it's, say, a left-wing group on television. They are not consistent about their questioning.
Because you can find that on our website straight away.
You can't. Sorry, Greenpeace don't release all their data.
Right, well, hang on a second. But hang on a second.
Why should a think tank be treated differently to any other part of civil society?
You're playing the victim here, Mark, and you're deflecting to other organisations, and you say you're not being treated fairly. And I'm asking you some basic questions about why people want to know. And do you understand that? Because if you are being given a platform and you have got very particular ideas, people want to know that these ideas are not ones that have been funded by vested interests before you've actually come to them yourself.
That would be, I think, reasonable if you could look through the IEA's back catalogue and say, this is a bit curious. One day they appear to be in favour of high taxes and the next day in low taxes.
It may be more nuanced than that.
So it is, if you could show, I defy anyone to look through the IEA's 63 years of research, more than 50 million words of research, and not detect a completely consistent classical liberal free market approach to everything.
All right, well, let's have a look at some of the examples, because the issues that you campaign on, and you're talking about consistency here, the question of the sugar tax and fizzy drinks. How can people, our viewers, have confidence in your arguments about freedom and individual choice if there is also a suspicion, maybe well-founded or not, that you have and are funded by companies with an interest in selling sugary drinks or products?
Because you might take the view that I and everybody else at the IEA are secretly, in our heart of hearts, socialists who want taxes and regulation to go up across the board, and we are not sincere in what we say, and actually we're all really hardened communists, and we're only putting this forward because we're corporate shills for corporate interests. You might take that view and think I'm insincere.
Right, but these are very specific. These are not broadly about whether you're a communist.
I don't want there to be a sugar tax.
But if you are being influenced, if you were transparent about who was funding you, people could then make their own judgments, and you could still make that argument. But, for instance, if we take something that is a little bit more nuanced, you call for a flat rate of 9p per unit of alcohol, as opposed to a whole range of possible duties. I'm not talking about taking the completely opposite view, and that was including up to 34p. Wouldn't it be relevant in people's minds if there were people in the alcohol industry who were donating money?
Why don't you engage with the topic? Is a 9p flat rate on alcohol a better way to internalise the externality, to use the economic argument, on alcohol? Then there was no consideration.
You've just made the point, because in order to engage with you on the topic, people want to know that you are independent in your ideas rather than being funded by the very people whose ideas you're espousing.
If there is any doubt about the independence of our ideas, I defy you to find one piece of work by the IEA which is not absolutely unambiguously in the classical liberal tradition.
All right,
if you could find us sometimes arguing for industrial subsidies here and tax breaks there,
been getting money to forward that view.
Well, we're libertarian. We're free market libertarians.
No, but what Pfizer is saying is that if you have always had money from certain vested interests, as people will see it, then those are the views that you've espoused. They don't know that these are ideas that you have come up with and then people have given you money. Have you ever accepted money from tobacco companies?
Well, I mean, I've said to you, we're not going to go through the list of phone directory and say, do you take from that one or this one or the other one? We will not allow any company to commission research from the IEA. We will not allow them to look at the research, and the independent researcher, who will approach it from a free market school of thought, from a particular angle, reaches their own conclusions.
Right, well, that is interesting. I'm going to just come on to a specific example about that. But have you accepted money from tobacco companies?
I'm not going to... Why are you picking on a tobacco company?
I don't know, it's just an example. We've talked about alcohol companies, we've talked about... Have you?
If tobacco companies are funding the IEA, I should think they'd be pretty angry at the campaign that the IEA have been running in favour of vaping, which has been devastating for the tobacco industry. If you look at the IEA on housing, it wants a deregulation of the sector, which would affect badly all the construction sectors.
And I am going to open this up. I'm just going to finish, because on that point about whether people are actually asking you to do research on their behalf, last year The Guardian reported that you received a donation of thousands of pounds from the casino industry after you called for restrictions on the number of casinos to be lifted. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the casino industry, that was in. It's correct. That was in the Guardian.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The National Casino Industry Forum confirmed it donated £8,000 to your organisation, having fact-checked a draft of the report. So they were actually fact-checking your work.
I want to be absolutely clear about this. If we are, by the way, you're right to say the donation followed the research, didn't pay for the research.
Well, they then say having fact-checked a draft of the report. Did that ever happen, that they are actually telling you what to write?
No, that is rather different. If you are writing about a particular sector, housing, casinos, sugar, it would be pretty ridiculous if you didn't go to people in that industry and say, from what we can tell, these are the number of, I don't know, people under the age of 18 who have been caught gambling in casinos. Does that, are these facts correct? That is not an editorial decision. The idea that think tanks should sit in ivory towers and not talk to anyone in the sector you're researching.
Right, but I have just pointed to a specific example where the implication is that is what's happened, that actually they were telling you what to do because they were going to give you a donation.
Well, that's emphatically not true. That's emphatically not true. But if you're writing about casinos, any author at the IEA is writing about casinos, we are utterly strict. They need to reach their own conclusions. But I think it would be a bit crazy if they didn't talk to anyone involved in the casino industry at all while they're putting that piece of work together.
Pfizer, listening to this is about ideas that do get a platform on programmes like this. Do you in any way accept the argument of privacy, first of all?
No, I think we should be absolutely transparent. And, you know, I'm really proud to run a think tank that every year gets a 5-star rating. You can go to our website right now, look up who funds us, and I will say it here, we're mainly funded by trade unions. Obviously, I come with a particular perspective. We all do. And to be honest about that is just the right thing to do.
Right,
and we have to think about vested interests.
But people are questioning what is coming first, Mark's ideas from the IEA
exactly,
or the
but we don't know, do we? That's the point. The point is with this is that we don't know how vested interests...
is a free market liberal think tank.
But they've always got their money from certain places, and why? What are you hiding? This is a question we always need to ask everyone.
David
Where
Dimbleby,
is
I think.
the money coming
let me
from?
just say, no, David Dimbleby, I think it was, you said about one of our staff members, that Kate Andrews, that the abuse she received on Twitter was vile, loathsome and utterly disgusting.
You're avoiding the issue.
And I don't know, if somebody wants to give us £5,000...
Why won't you be transparent?
Because I don't want them to receive vile, loathsome and disgusting
none of our funders get vile abuse.
Well, our staff do.
Well, hang on, but that's interesting. If
us.
Pfizer is saying that actually the companies that fund, or the trade unions, don't get that sort of abuse, is it the time now to put this to rest, be more transparent, be more upfront, and see what happens?
No, I don't believe that in a free society, I don't believe that we should, for example, put party political membership lists.
Hang on.
The Labour Party membership list is not in the public domain, and nor should it be so.
All right,
it is perfectly legitimate for people to privately donate to private causes.
Let's talk about think tanks. What are your views in listening to this debate?
I think transparency is absolutely crucial here, because if you had a sugar company, for example, coming out saying particular things, you would know that that was their point of view, you would know that's why they were saying it.
But that is Mark's point of view anyway, he says.
Yeah, but if it's coming via a think tank, you don't know anymore who benefits from that, who's paying the money, who's putting the money in there, and transparency is important here. And I think this is really a reputational issue now for think tanks, because think tanks can't prove where their money is coming from, certainly not the right-wing think tanks that were highlighted in your film. And if they can't prove where it's coming from, those questions will always be asked, and legitimately so.
Is there a political element to this, Tim? Because Mark said, you know, it's not fair because, you know, people don't ask the same sorts of questions of people on the left or Do you think that is the case, or is that an excuse?
I think what Mark says is generally fair, and I'd like to sort of take a slight step backwards, and I'm very grateful that in London we have left-wing, conservative, free market think tank. We have a huge variety of policy making and generation going on. That absolutely benefits
but should we know
political discussion. Well, in perhaps an ideal world, you would. But what would be worse for me would be if the money started to dry up. I used to be part of the Legatum Institute. Don't get any money from them anymore. But not so long ago, that think tank and the very generous donor behind it was subject to a terrible vilification campaign in the press. And donors are generally people, in all of my experience, and I've known a lot of them, are absolutely essential to the generation of ideas. And most of them do not have a sort of a policy or whatever in mind. And if we had complete transparency, the persecution of the donors might satisfy some of these people, but the loss to the quality of debate, the loss to the funding of research would impair British politics quite considerably.
Is it that you don't like the ideas and that's why you want to know who funds?
No, we need to know where the money comes from. We always do. With the independent group as well, with any campaign, we need to ask where the money comes from.
A lot of stuff in the public domain.
Nick Robinson's going to be here in this chair presenting tomorrow. Politics Live from all of us. Bye-bye.